Critical controls, what does good look like in 2026 and beyond? If a frontline worker came to you and said, tell me what a critical control is, how could you explain it to them in a way that was simple and made sense? So welcome to SafetyCast, the podcast for safety professionals to lift their critical risk game. My name's Christian Young, and I'm going to go through this idea. This is part of a mini-series on critical control management. And again, for those watching, I do have some notes and I have to look at them so I can give you the best value. And what we're starting with today is, what is a critical control? So like that scenario, you're on the front line, a worker came up to you and asked you that question. Could you answer it in a simple way that they understand, not through a theoretical framework? And what we have seen, unfortunately, across lots of industries or across lots of clients is sometimes they can't articulate it well, or the critical controls they do share with people aren't actually critical controls, let alone controls in and of themselves. So for example, training or inductions or procedures, they don't make the cut. So how do we fix this? How do we move forwards? And one of the things I did in a recent workshop that I ran is I asked a lot of safety professionals, well, what's their one-liner? What do they use? And there's some good things fell out of that. So for example, a not negotiable control tied to a fatal risk. That's pretty good. A control that, if it fails, leads directly to serious harm. So we can see a relationship with fatality or serious harm or a high consequence outcome and the control. So that's some good language. What we also need then is some structure or a framework around it. And so we use some simple questions to help validate this. I'll talk about in a different podcast about what is a control and what is not. Let's assume that these things pass that test. So some other tests that we can perform is, if this control failed or was absent, is it more likely we will have the unwanted outcome? And if the answer is yes, then this might mean that this thing is potentially critical. Another one that we like to ask is, how many times do we rely on this control within a bow tie, so across a series of causes or to mitigate a series of consequences, across a series of bow ties, across a series of risks? And if we rely on it a number of times, then that could be another insight that helps us understand that this might be critical. So an example there could be emergency response. Wherever we have the risk of a fatality, oftentimes we have in our system something around how do we respond to this, so an emergency response, and we see that listed multiple times. Another one, which is probably related to more of a control first, is it specific, measurable, and auditable? So we don't want these high-level generic things. Is it specific? We can see if it's there or not there. That's also very important. So if we go the other end, if everything's critical, then nothing is. And we've worked with some clients that had 300, 400 critical controls. And what we did in that scenario is we applied the definitions. So there's some frameworks. Hopefully you have some frameworks in place for, firstly, what's a control, what's a critical control. Applied the frameworks, and they went from 300 critical controls down to 150 critical controls. So the same risks, half the noise in terms of critical controls. It didn't introduce any risk. All we did was just a reallocation. The control was still there. We just didn't call it critical. And by not calling it critical, we could then reduce a lot of the assurance work that comes with this thing called a critical control. So the challenge for this week, or every organisation, is grab a list of your critical controls. Do they pass these tests that we've talked about here? Are they specific, measurable, auditable? Are they associated with high-risk scenarios? Are they potentially more prevalent, and therefore they should be critical? So prevalent in terms of how much we rely on them. And the other thing, coming back to what we started with, if a frontline worker asked you, what is a critical control? What is the one-liner? What's the way that all the organisation can rally around and have the same wording around what is truly a critical control versus what is not. And that's where we need to be. That's what can help us save lives. So thanks for listening. If this got you listening, then please subscribe to the Safety Cast, share this with whoever you might find this of value. And we've got way more practical tips on critical control management coming up in future episodes. So until then, stay safe. Bye-bye.